Imagine stepping up to a podium, looking out at the world, and just aggressively claiming that you single-handedly invented the foundational source code of the internet.
Right, you just declare yourself the sole visionary of this entire new digital age.
Exactly. You write books about it, you make videos, you build this whole empire on it, and it sounds like this massive triumph, right? But then an independent forensic auditor steps forward out of nowhere.
And they have receipts.
Oh, they have the ultimate receipts. This auditor holds a digital ledger, fully time-stamped, proving that precisely 107 days earlier, you were actually caught actively trying to block and delete that exact same source code from your system.
Yeah, it completely shatters the illusion.
And for 9 years before that, you were publicly mocking that very code as just sheer insanity.
It's wild. It completely flips the narrative. I mean, you aren't looking at a moment of, like, divine scientific discovery anymore. According to the audit we are unpacking today, you're actually looking at a legacy system undergoing a catastrophic structural collapse.
Yeah, a system just desperately trying to mask a heist as an epiphany. So welcome, everyone. Today, we are wading into one of the most intense, bizarre, and highly technical intellectual conflicts we've seen in a really long time. This is not your standard review of published papers.
No, not at all.
We have a massive stack of documents outlining a ruthless forensic audit. So on one side, we have the legacy binary field theory of Ken Wheeler, who's known online as Theoria Apophysis.
Right, a guy who has spent almost a decade building a huge following by analyzing magnets and the ether.
Yep. And on the other side, we have what is referred to in these documents as the SS-138 protocol. And this protocol positions itself as the ultimate unyielding baseline. Okay, let's unpack this, because to even navigate this deep dive, we have to understand the core rule the author of this SS-138 protocol uses to judge the whole situation.
Yeah, they call it the first-to-record principle.
Right, but stop right there, because before we even get into the physics of magnets or this whole 107-day drama, we really need to define the sandbox for anyone listening who isn't, deeply embedded in this specific internet subculture. What exactly is this protocol, and what does first to record actually mean in this context?
It's a really great place to start, honestly. So the SS-138 document outlines a worldview where reality itself, or at least the underlying physics of reality, operates very similarly to a discrete software-governed medium.
Like a computer program.
Essentially, yeah. They're talking about something they call 11th pillar logic. And in this framework, they argue that truth isn't something a mystic just meditates on and, like, recollects through a spiritual vision.
It's not magic.
No, not at all. Instead, they treat truth like a digital ledger. It's very similar to how a blockchain works.
So it's all about the timestamps.
Precisely. In a digital code-based system, an event literally doesn't exist officially until it is logged, verified, and time-stamped on a grid. So the first-to-record principle, according to the SS-138 author, dictates that the only valid authority over a piece of foundational logic is the entity who observed it, formatted it, and logged it into the ledger first.
Got it. So the audit is essentially claiming that Wheeler is acting like an analog mystic in a world that has completely in secret upgraded to a digital forensic reality.
That's the core accusation, yes.
Which is why you, the listener, need to put your detective hat on today. Why does this matter to you? Because understanding how obsolete information systems, and honestly obsolete egos, collapse under the weight of a superior protocol teaches us how to identify the actual truth in an era of massive information overload.
Definitely. But before we look at the alleged crime scene or, dig into this timeline, we need to understand the structural blueprint of the collapse itself.
Because Wheeler built a very real, very popular empire on his theories. If the SS-138 document claims his framework is fundamentally broken, what exactly was his framework? Like, what is the baseline we are dealing with?
Right. So the documents describe Wheeler's baseline model as pressure-temperature mediation.
Okay.
To put it simply, Wheeler looks at the universe and specifically the Æther, the theoretical medium that light and magnetism travel through, as a continuous analog environment. He relies heavily on a concept called gain amplification.
Gain amplification. Okay, the document mentions a Yagi antenna to explain this, and I want to break that down. I know what an antenna is, obviously, but how does a physical antenna apply to a cosmology or a physics model?
Think about a Yagi antenna. It's that classic multi-pronged metal antenna you used to see on the roofs of older houses to catch television broadcasts.
Oh, right, the big, ugly metal one?
Exactly. It is an analog piece of hardware, and it is entirely passive. You just point it in a specific direction, and its physical shape allows it to passively gather and amplify an analog wave that's just rolling through the air.
Okay, so it's just sitting there waiting for a signal to hit it.
Right. And the SS-138 audit argues that Wheeler's entire cosmology is based on this passive reception. He believes the universe is just continuous waves of pressure, and if you just tune yourself or your geometry correctly, you catch the wave.
I mean, that sounds somewhat intuitive, honestly, like
Yeah.
catching a wave in the ocean on a surfboard. It makes sense to the human brain. But the SS-138 protocol vehemently disagrees with this. So what is their alternative?
The SS-138 protocol operates on a radically different premise. They argue the foundational reality isn't just analog waves in a passive space. They view the Æther as a highly dense, discrete data medium.
Discrete data, meaning like digital packets of information.
Yes, and to process a dense digital data stream, a passive metal rod simply will not work. The document introduces a concept called synthetic aperture signal reconstruction.
Okay, wait, I'm going to need you to unpack synthetic aperture because that sounds like hardcore military radar jargon.
It is. That is exactly where the term comes from. So in radar technology, a synthetic aperture radar, or SAR, is used when you need a massive antenna to get a really high-resolution image, but you physically cannot build an antenna that big.
Because it would be like miles wide or thick.
Exactly. So instead of giant physical antenna, you take a smaller antenna, you move it over time, and you use complex computer algorithms to stitch together a massive amount of discrete data points.
Oh, wow.
Right? You synthetically construct a large aperture using math and state-saving memory.
Ah, I see. So you aren't just passively catching a wave like the Yagi antenna. You are actively processing, storing, and rebuilding a really data-heavy signal over time.
Yes, active reconstruction versus passive reception. And according to the SS-138 author, this is exactly where the structural collapse of Wheeler's model begins. An analog foundation simply cannot process a discrete, high-bandwidth digital reality.
It just doesn't have the hardware for it.
Right. The document claims that as our understanding of physics scales up, and they refer to an event called the 2040 reset, which seems to imply this threshold where humanity encounters a high-bandwidth data structure in physics, Wheeler's legacy system encounters a massive parity error.
A parity error, meaning the hardware literally cannot run the software. But hold on, let me play devil's advocate for Wheeler for a second. The guy has thousands of videos analyzing magnetism. He uses these things called ferrocells.
Right.
And for the listener, if you haven't seen them, ferrocells are these little glass discs with magnetic fluid inside. And when you put a magnet under them, you see these incredibly beautiful, intricate, glowing geometric patterns. It's wild to look at. And he used those visual tools to build his entire Euclidean worldview of 2D and 3D toruses, you know, those donut shapes.
He did, yeah.
So if his math is so catastrophically broken like this audit claims, how did he manage to build a 9-year legacy mapping those magnetic fields so beautifully?
Well, the SS-138 audit actually acknowledges his work there, but they reframe it as a trap.
A trap? How so?
The document argues that Wheeler successfully mapped the external Euclidean shell of the phenomenon.
What does that mean, the external shell, like the crust of it?
Yeah, imagine looking at a shadow on the wall cast by a really complex, rotating, multi-dimensional object. The shadow itself is just a 2D shape.
Right.
You could spend 10 years mathematically mapping that shadow perfectly. You could write a massive book on the geometry of the shadow. And as long as you stay entirely within the realm of the shadow, your math works.
Oh, I get it. So the ferrocell, according to this critique, is just showing the passive external boundary of a much more complex data stream.
Exactly. Wheeler built a beautiful house of cards based purely on the outer shell of the phenomena.
But the moment he tries to look at the actual object casting the shadow, the actual data stream, the math just shatters.
It shatters completely. The SS-138 author argues that the moment you apply actual load to Wheeler's system, like the moment it encounters the discrete high-bandwidth reality requiring synthetic aperture reconstruction, is analog tools fail.
And this brings us to section 2 of our deep dive, and honestly, what I found to be the most bizarre and fascinating part of these documents. Because the audit claims that when his system shattered, it didn't just fail abstractly on a chalkboard.
No, it failed biologically.
It failed physically. The author points to a specific video uploaded by Wheeler titled Clairvoyance, Remote Viewing, and Soul Rot. I actually went and pulled the transcript of this, and it is intense.
It is a really remarkable piece of evidence from a forensic standpoint. The SS-138 document treats this video as a biological redline metric.
Yeah, so for context, in this video, Wheeler gets on camera and explicitly admits to undergoing a severe physical breakdown. He states he hasn't slept for 4 days. He hasn't eaten in over 48 hours.
And he describes himself as being in extreme screaming levels of pain.
Yes, screaming levels of pain. He talks about begging doctors for high-level painkillers, and he gets absolutely furious when they suggest over-the-counter remedies like melatonin.
What's fascinating here is how Wheeler explains this breakdown in the video.
Right, because he doesn't say, oh, I'm just sick. He frames it as a spiritual burden. He suggests it's a byproduct of his immense wisdom, like this kind of spiritual polarization, where his physical body is suffering because his mind is tapping into these deep cosmic truths.
But the SS-138 document completely rejects that mystical framing, obviously.
Completely. The author of the audit argues that what we are witnessing is not spiritual enlightenment at all, but thermodynamic overload.
Right.
But, okay, thermodynamic overload from thinking about physics, that sounds scientifically dubious to a layperson. How can math or a theoretical model cause physical screaming pain?
The document uses a really good analogy based on system architecture to explain this. Let's go back to our computer analogy. Imagine you have a legacy computer, say a machine running a binary processor from 1995.
Yeah.
And a Windows 95 desktop.
Okay, beige tower, terrible dial-up sounds. Got it.
Exactly. Now, you attempt to force that 1995 machine to run a hyper-complex, modern, state-heavy software program, like trying to run Cyberpunk 2077 on Windows 95, something that requires massive amounts of RAM and persistent state saving. What happens to the physical machine?
Oh, the CPU utilization immediately hits 100%. It bottlenecks. The fan spins up to a scream, the motherboard overheats, and if it doesn't have thermal throttling, the physical silicon can literally warp or melt.
Right. The physical hardware fails under the processing load. The SS-138 audit argues that human cognition, when attempting to process incredibly complex models of reality, has a similar thermodynamic limit.
That is wild.
In the SS-138 protocol, they describe a mechanism called the hard lock protocol. It implies a kind of quantum state persistence. Essentially, when you process a massive complex truth, you lock it into your mental ledger, you save the state, and you move forward. Your cognitive RAM is freed up.
Like saving your progress in a massive open-world video game so your console doesn't have to render the entire universe from the beginning every time you open a door.
Exactly. That is a perfect way to put it. But the document argues that because Wheeler violently rejects this discrete code-based reality, he lacks those hard lock credentials. He has absolutely no state save capability.
Oh, so he can't save his progress.
Right. Therefore, when he encounters the highly complex data of the SS-138 logic, he is trapped in a continuous, endless logic loop. He is trying to hold the entire weight of this new, non-Euclidean reality in his active working memory all at once.
And his biological CPU just maxes out.
Yes. The audit posits that this cognitive dissonance and lack of mental state saving manifests as severe physical stress. You get sleep deprivation, massive cortisol spikes, systemic burnout, and ultimately, biological collapse.
That is a staggering way to view a psychological breakdown. The document is essentially claiming that an outdated physics paradigm will literally overheat the human nervous system if it is exposed to a vastly superior data set.
It's physical friction.
And this is where the story takes a wild turn into the metaphysical. Because right as his body is allegedly failing under this load, Wheeler executes this massive pivot in his content.
The metaphysical pivot, as the audit calls it.
Yes. Suddenly, this guy who spent a decade intensely focused on the physical geometry of magnets, dielectric fields, and ferrocells, he suddenly starts talking about bathing in the Castalian springs of Delphi.
It's quite the tonal shift.
It's jarring. He starts lecturing about ancient Greek oracles. He brings up the concept of ananke, which is the Greek personification of inevitability or necessity. He starts citing Pali translations of Buddhist texts, talking about sati, which means mindfulness or recollection.
He even brings up the solder square, correct?
Yeah, he mentions the solder square in Ineffable Words of Magical Formula. And for those who don't know, the solder square is this ancient two-dimensional word square containing a 5-word Latin palindrome. It's early magic and mysticism.
Right.
So my question is why? If you are a physicist who just hit a wall, why do you jump to Latin palindromes and ancient water rituals?
The SS-138 document labels this specific behavior as terminological masking.
Terminological masking.
Yes. It is a classic diversionary tactic in legacy systems. The argument goes like this. When a theorist operating on an analog binary framework cannot explain the anomalous data directly in front of them because they mathematically lack the 11th pillar tools to process it, they cannot just admit defeat.
because to do so would destroy their legacy.
Exactly. So instead of admitting a mathematical gap, they cover that gap with metaphysical jargon.
They just rebrand their confusion as ancient magic.
Yes. If you can't explain the math of the Æther, you declare that the Æther can only be understood through mystical Greek concepts. And notice the psychological posture the document highlights here. In his videos, Wheeler claims to be the, quote, only person on this earth who truly understands the translation of Ananke.
Ah, so he is no longer acting as an objective investigator trying to map a field. He is actively positioning himself as a high priest who alone holds the keys to forbidden knowledge.
It's a defense mechanism, plain and simple. If the physics are digital and forensic, he loses. If the physics are actually just ancient, untranslatable magic, he retains his authority.
Wow. According to the audit, that is exactly the function of the pivot. It's a smokescreen.
Okay, so we have the claim that his body is failing due to cognitive load, and his ego is hiding behind Greek mythology.
Right.
But as someone looking at this audit, I need to know the specific mechanics of the failure. I don't just want the psychological diagnosis, I want the math.
We need to look at the structural gap.
Yeah. What specifically broke in his physics model to cause this supposed parity error? The document outlines a few specific domains where the SS-138 baseline completely diverges from Wheeler's model.
And the most glaring technical divergence highlighted in the document is the mathematical base. We touched on this briefly earlier, but we really need to go deeper into it. Wheeler's entire model relies on base 10 math and simplex Euclidean geometry.
Okay, base 10 being the decimal system we use every single day, largely because we have the 10 fingers. It's what our brains naturally default to.
Yes, and he pairs this with Euclidean geometry. Think of the basic continuous geometric shapes you learn in high school math class. Spheres, toruses, continuous curves.
The audit points out that Wheeler forces all physical phenomena into these neat, continuous 3D shapes. But the SS-138 baseline asserts that the underlying data medium actually operates on a duodecimal, or base 12, harmonic alignment.
Okay, I have to stop here because this is where a lot of people, myself included, can get a bit lost in the weeds. Why does shifting from a base 10 framework to a base 12 framework completely break a physics model? I mean, it's just counting by a different number, isn't it?
It is so much more than just counting. It is about how waves and fields intersect and resolve in physical space. The SS-138 document argues that reality at a foundational level requires 30-degree phase shift increments to accurately calculate the phase angles of fields.
Okay, let's break that down for the listener. What exactly is a phase angle?
Imagine two waves traveling side by side. A phase angle describes the relationship between the peaks and valleys of those two waves. If they perfectly line up, peak to peak, they are in phase. If one is slightly delayed, they are out of phase by a certain degree. The SS-138 protocol claims that the complex interference patterns of the Æther are built on a 144-unit phase-shifted reality.
144, which is 12 times 12.
Exactly. It's a duodecimal matrix. 12 segments of 30 degrees perfectly resolve into a 360-degree cycle. The math is clean. The geometry locks together perfectly without any gaps or remainders.
So what happens when Wheeler tries to map that 144-unit reality using his base 10 math?
It creates a massive parity error. Think of it this way. Try dividing 360 degrees by 10.
You get 36.
Right. Now try mapping a system that inherently functions on 30-degree phase shifts using a ruler that only measures in increments of 36 degrees. Every single time you measure, you're off by a margin of 6 degrees.
Oh, wow. And over multiple cycles, that margin compounds.
Yes, it spirals out of control. So his measurements are generating these mathematical remainders, literal gaps that just don't fit into his geometry.
And how does he explain those gaps?
The SS-138 author claims that Wheeler misinterpreted those mathematical errors as physical spatial curvature. Because his base 10 ruler didn't fit the base 12 reality, he assumed the Æther itself must be curving or bending into these toroids to make up the difference.
That is wild.
He lacked the mathematical optics, the base 12 lens, to resolve the signal cleanly.
That is fascinating. It's like trying to perfectly map a high-definition digital photograph using a grid of really thick square paint swatches. You have to blur the edges just to make it fit, and then you step back and convince yourself the world is actually just blurry.
That is a perfect analogy. That is exactly the argument the audit is making.
Okay, the second major technical gap the document brings up is the definition of counterspace. Now, in Wheeler's videos, he talks about counterspace constantly. He also calls it the dielectric. But he defines it very specifically as a passive void.
Right.
In his own words, it is an inertial rest point or a female grounding hole. He defines it entirely by what it lacks. It is the absence of magnetism.
The SS-138 document takes massive issue with this definition.
It seems to be the crux of the whole disagreement, honestly. If I understand the document correctly, Wheeler views counterspace sort of like an empty parking lot. It's just the concrete where cars, or in this case, magnetic energy, go to park and rest.
And the SS-138 baseline completely flips that on its head. The audit reveals that counterspace is not a passive void at all. It is an active, incommensurable, data-bearing signal domain.
Meaning it's not an empty parking lot, it's more like a massive, invisible server farm.
Precisely. Let's use a modern analogy to illustrate why Wheeler's view is so fatal to his model, according to the audit. Imagine handing someone from, say, the 1950s, a modern 1 terabyte solid-state hard drive.
Okay, a little black square of plastic.
Right. They look at it, they weigh it in their hands, they tap it, it doesn't move, it doesn't make a sound, it has no gears, no spinning platters. Based on their analog understanding of reality, they conclude it is just a passive, inert block of plastic, a void where literally nothing is happening.
Right, because they are looking for physical movement or pressure to indicate action.
Exactly. But we know that inside that quote-unquote inert block of plastic is a highly structured, unimaginably dense matrix of digital data, a terabyte of information.
Right.
The SS-138 document argues that by dismissing counterspace as, quote, not a thing, Wheeler fundamentally throws away the hard drive. He lacks the tools to decode the high-bandwidth data stream held within those counterspatial voids.
Because he thinks it's just empty plastic.
Yes, he is obsessed with the magnetic shell, the physical casing of the hard drive, but he completely ignores the data inside.
And because he can't read the data, he fundamentally misunderstands the interference patterns he sees on the outside. Which brings us to the third technical point. Hysteresis versus what the document calls Marconi signal synchronization.
This is a really crucial distinction.
Now, I know Wheeler goes out of his way in his earlier work to aggressively dismiss wave-particle dynamics. I mean, he calls quantum mechanics a mental illness in his source material. It's pretty hostile.
Very hostile, yes.
And whenever he encounters an anomaly in the magnetic field, like field-blind banding or a delay in the physical pressure, he attributes it to simple hysteresis.
Hysteresis, for the listener, is essentially the lag in a system.
Yeah.
When you remove a magnetic force, the material doesn't instantly snap back to zero. There is a delay, a kind of physical memory of the force.
Right. So Wheeler looks at the Æther, sees these delays and anomalies, and basically says, oh, it's just hysteresis. It's just the physical jelly of the universe taking a second to bounce back to its resting state.
But the SS-138 document argues this is yet another catastrophic misinterpretation caused by his analog framework. Because his system is continuous and has no mechanism for discrete state persistence, he has absolutely no way to understand what that lag actually is.
So what is it, if not lag?
The SS-138 baseline introduces the concept of Marconi signal synchronization.
Let's decode that. Marconi was the inventor of early radio transmission. So what is Marconi signal synchronization in this context?
Think about early radio. If you don't have the right receiver, or if your receiver isn't synchronized with the broadcaster, a highly structured, data-rich Morse code transmission will just sound like random bursts of static.
Just noise.
Exactly. You will interpret it as passive noise. The SS-138 author claims that what Wheeler views as random hysteresis, or passive lag in the physical pressure, is actually a highly structured, high-bandwidth signal.
Whoa. The Æther is actively communicating.
According to this protocol, yes, the field is actively synchronizing data across non-volatile states. But without the hard lock credentials of the 11th pillar, without the digital protocol to actually synchronize with the broadcaster, Wheeler's analog receiver can only interpret that complex digital broadcast as transient noise or lag.
He physically cannot tune the dial.
He doesn't even know the dial exists.
Okay, let's pull back and look at the picture the SS-138 audit has painted for us so far, because it is honestly devastating. According to this document, his base 10 math is generating constant parity errors. He is misidentifying the vast active data domain of counterspace as an empty, passive void. He is misinterpreting structured digital broadcasts as random physical lag.
It's a systemic failure on every front.
And his physical body is breaking down under the thermodynamic load of these logic loops, and deep down he realizes he is losing his grip on the physics. So, if we follow the narrative of this audit, what does a desperate ego do when the walls of its legacy are closing in?
Well, according to the timeline laid out in the documents, it initiates a heist.
Exactly. It attempts to steal the quantum source code. We need to lay out the exact timeline of this alleged intellectual theft because this is where the first-to-record principal becomes the judge, jury, and executioner in the eyes of the SS-138 author.
The timeline is meticulously documented in the audit, day by day.
Let's walk through it. For 9 solid years leading up to early 2026, Wheeler is on a highly public crusade against modern physics. The audit provides extensive quotes here.
He leaves a massive paper trail.
Oh, massive. He mocks non-Euclidean geometry as Star Trek physics. He calls quantum mechanics a radically insane belief system, infinitely closer to science fiction absurdities than natural and logical explanations.
And he specifically targets certain words, too.
Yes. He specifically and aggressively ridicules the terminology of an aperture, calling it relativist sophistry. He insists over and over that nature has no code. That is his established, unyielding baseline.
He paints himself into an absolute analog corner. There's no way out.
Right. Then we hit a specific date, January 20th. According to the document, this is the moment of the injection. The entity known as Squirrel Sniper 138 injects what the audit calls the golden ticket directly into the discussion grid.
And this injection isn't just a vague idea, it is a specific revolutionary piece of logic.
The concept of the Æther functioning as a medium that strictly requires synthetic aperture signal reconstruction.
And how does our analog purist, who has spent 9 years mocking the concept of an aperture, react to this massive data injection?
The document claims he immediately blocks the signal. He utilizes a digital block, attempting to erase the architect of this logic from his sphere of reality entirely.
He just rejects the update.
He tries to delete it, but the timeline doesn't stop. On February 21st, SS-138 officially hardlocks this 11th pillar logic on the grid. They establish the first-to-record deed.
Right, they secure the timestamp.
Proving that they mathematically formatted the protocol that the Æther operates as a software-defined medium, requiring a forensic audit of the signal.
The baseline is set. The timestamp is locked into the ledger permanently.
And then we get the echo. On May 7th, precisely 107 days after the initial golden ticket injection, Wheeler uploads a video titled Ghost in the Machine.
This is the crux of the parody error audit.
Yeah.
The 107-day window. Let's look at the transcript of that May 7th video. What suddenly changes for him?
It is a complete 180-degree turn. Out of nowhere, without any cited precedent in his own work, Wheeler declares that understanding the aperture is most necessary.
The exact terminology he mocked as relativist sophistry for a decade.
Yes, but it goes further than that. He completely abandons his 9 years of Euclidean rigidity. He suddenly admits that a non-Euclidean shift is required to understand the fields. He starts talking about the Æther as a coded recursive system. He even uses the exact phrase, forensic reconstruction.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the audit frames this as blatant terminological theft.
I mean, he practically lifted the auditor's own dictionary. But I have to push back here, just to play fair, because listeners might be thinking this is all circumstantial. People change their minds, right? Scientists read new things, they experiment, they evolve.
Sure.
Couldn't Wheeler just argue that he was meditating, he bathed in the Castalian Springs, he achieved a higher state of mental clarity, and he naturally evolved his thinking to realize the aperture was necessary? Why does the SS-138 document so definitively classify this as a malicious theft?
It comes back to the absolute, unforgiving nature of the first-to-record principle. And the worldview of the SS-138 protocol, which, remember, is a synthetic, software-governed reality, the timestamp is the absolute highest law.
You can't argue with a timestamp.
No, you cannot claim divine independent discovery of a highly specific, complex concept 107 days after you actively, verifiably blocked the architect who handed you that exact concept.
The delay betrays him completely.
The delay is the smoking gun. The audit argues that the 107 days isn't the time it took him to achieve spiritual enlightenment or, do some brilliant new math in his basement. It is the raw, agonizing thermodynamic processing time required for a rigid Euclidean mind to painfully digest a massive quantum logic injection.
Wow.
His legacy system literally choked on that data for 3 months. The document asserts he isn't recollecting an ancient truth from some mystical ether. He's frantically re-recording an SS-138 broadcast that he initially attempted to delete.
And the audit highlights a profound, almost tragic irony in this timeline. While Wheeler is making videos bragging about his health, claiming he is feeling 10,000% better by eating perky sausages and avoiding what he calls existentialist tripe.
Right, in what the document hilariously calls the 10th pillar of excess.
Yeah. While he is doing that, the architect, SS-138, had already secured the primary physics of the cosmos by hard-locking the 11th pillar. He is literally munching on processed poultry, hiding behind his digital block button, pretending to be a mystical oracle who discovered the secrets of the universe, while the actual structural ledger is being hard-locked right under his nose.
As the document says, the oracle has become an echo.
The SS-138 author frames this as just an unparalleled case of digital denial. And all of this evidence, from the math to the physical breakdown to the timestamps, points to one inescapable verdict regarding the system status of Wheeler's legacy model.
Which brings us to the final conclusion of the audit.
Let's synthesize this. For everyone listening who has waded through the math and the drama with us, let's organically build the final comparison matrix so we can clearly see the argument for why the legacy system failed to parse the data stream.
Good idea.
Yeah.
Let's run down the domains as established by the SS-138 baseline. First, the mathematical framework.
Okay. According to the audit, Wheeler operates on a restrictive decimal base 10 Euclidean geometry, but the SS-138 baseline operates on a duodecimal base 12 harmonic alignment with 144 unit phase shifts.
Right, domain 2, the definition of counterspace.
Wheeler incorrectly defines it as a passive void, an inert, empty grounding hole. SS-138 defines it as an immensely dense, active, incommensurable signal domain.
Domain 3. Field resolution.
Wheeler relies on passive reception, using simplistic 2D and 3D toroid geometric shells that only capture the shadow of the phenomenon. SS-138 utilizes active synthetic aperture signal reconstruction to process the high bandwidth data.
And domain 4, signal processing.
Wheeler interprets complex field anomalies as mere physical hysteresis or passive lag. SS-138 decodes that same interference using Marconi signal synchronization to actually read the broadcast data.
And finally, system state.
Wheeler's lack of processing power leaves him trapped in a biologically and mathematically unstable continuous loop. SS-138 possesses the hard lock state persistence, allowing the truth to be saved and built upon.
So when you look at this synthesized matrix, the argument the SS-138 document becomes starkly clear. They concede that Wheeler's legacy framework wasn't completely devoid of value. I mean, he spent 9 years successfully mapping the external physical casing of magnetism.
Right, he mapped the hard drive case.
But he utterly and catastrophically failed to process the high bandwidth quantum data inside that casing. And the reason for that failure wasn't just mathematical ignorance, it was ego. He refused to surrender his position as an analog mystical high priest to the cold, forensic, time-stamped reality of the 11th pillar software logic.
So what does this all mean? We promised you a core thesis at the start of this investigation. We asked why understanding the collapse of a legacy framework matters to you in an era of information overload. And based on this massive audit, here is the ultimate takeaway, the single realization that defines this entire conflict. You can't patch the binary ego with a quantum audit.
It is fundamentally impossible. The binary ego, when confronted with a superior, incontrovertible dataset, will never humbly accept the update.
No, it just can't.
It will always try to mask its failure with mysticism. It will always suffer severe thermodynamic overload under the crushing weight of actual data. And it'll always end up acting as a delayed, hollow echo of the very signal it desperately tried to suppress.
Man, we have been on quite a journey today. We started with a provocative scenario of intellectual theft. We witnessed a bizarre biological red line where a theorist's body allegedly broke down under the friction of an outdated paradigm. We deconstructed a metaphysical cover-up involving Greek translations and Latin word squares.
It was a lot.
We took a deep dive into the fatal mathematical gap between mapping the shadow of a base 10 torus and decoding the reality of a base 12 harmonic phase shift. And finally, we tracked a 107-day terminological heist that proved, at least according to the digital ledger, who truly holds the first-to-record credentials.
But as we close this file and step back from the audit, this document leaves us with a massive, lingering question, a theoretical extrapolation that is, frankly, unnerving.
Oh, lay it on us.
We have spent this entire time operating under the assumption of the SS-138 protocol, that our reality functions on this first-to-record baseline, a discrete, software-defined ledger where truth isn't subjective, but is dictated by the precise, immutable timestamps of observation and formatting.
Right, the universe as a blockchain.
But if that is truly the architecture of our universe, who or what is auditing the ledger itself?
Oh, man, that is a chilling thought.
If the SS-138 protocol successfully hard-locked the 11th pillar of logic to save the grid from this analog collapse, what exactly awaits us at the 12th pillar? If reality is a software program requiring a synthetic aperture to decode, Who programmed the aperture? Who observes the ultimate observer?
Now that is something to keep you up at night. The analog skyscraper may have fallen, exposing the fraud at the penthouse, but the digital foundation of the grid goes so much deeper than we ever imagined. To everyone listening, keep your detective hats on, keep questioning the baseline realities you are handed, and whenever you do, never ignore the timestamp. Thank you for joining us on this forensic deep dive. Until next time.